Good evening, everyone. My name is Christian, as you know, and have you ever wondered how a hurricane is created? I know that they just kind of slam into Florida and Texas recently, but the news doesn't give you a lot of where they came from, how they formed, where they're going, etc. Usually, they give you a track, but that's all. So I'm here to give you a basic understanding of hurricanes, where they start, how they're classified, and how they're named. So the stages. Hurricanes start as a thunderstorm over warm ocean. Okay, so they primarily start in Himalayas and in Africa. Okay, the thunderstorm will come over through Africa and right into the Atlantic. So the first stage is a tropical depression, and that's essentially that. It's just high thunderstorms with warm evaporation. And the warm evaporation, the water has to be anywhere from 79 to 82 degrees for it to really start kicking into power, So the ocean surface winds and the higher elevated winds create the structure of it, okay? So think of a tornado. You see the bottom starts to form, you see the top starts to form, and then they connect. Same thing with a hurricane. The eye, so everyone talks about that dot in the middle of hurricanes. That's called the eye. It's a really key part of a hurricane. If it doesn't have an eye, it's not a hurricane. It's dead. So this is where the evaporation I was talking about, this is where it rises through the middle of the hurricane or the tropical storm and starts building those big thunderstorms above the hurricane. So when you see views from like a helicopter, an airplane or atmosphere views of a hurricane, you're seeing the top, not seeing the bottom. So the top looks really big. That's because where everything's growing. And those are called rain bands. So sometimes you'll see they look like tentacles coming out, like a octopus kind of thing with a single mouth. That's what that is. So the eye wall is the most dangerous part because that's where the highest winds are. So you have that warm wind coming in. It's called updraft. Warm wind coming in, and it's spinning as fast as it can. Okay, so that's where all that power's at. Another key part of a hurricane, as we talked about already, is the twisting. Okay, so if the storm is static, if it's not moving, then it's not a hurricane, or it's not becoming a hurricane. So it's just a thunderstorm. The moment it starts twisting, that's when they start classifying as a thunderstorm. If the thunderstorm or if the tropical depression is in the north hemisphere, it spins counterclockwise. It's in the south, it spins clockwise. It's just part of how the earth rotates. Tropical storms, tropical depressions have winds less than 38 miles per hour. Sorry, dyslexic here. So second stage is a tropical storm. They have winds from 39 to 73. Okay, and I'm talking about winds a lot, and I'm going to talk even more about them here in a minute, but that's really how they classify or categorize these storms. Hurricanes are born once the wind reaches 74 miles per hour. An interesting fact, the most dangerous, the most damage that comes from a hurricane isn't from the wind. So we saw a bunch of trees come down yesterday. We saw a lot of rain and stuff like that. It's the storm surge. It's the coastal cities that have that constant rising water. Now we get flooding here too. That's just because our drainage is bad. But when you bring that ocean, you suck that ocean out and you bring it back in, that storm surge, I'm going to talk about it later, can be huge. It can be 3 stories tall. And that's where all the damage comes from. It's because you can't, the wind damage, it's going to break some things, it's going to rip some things off. The flooding, that's going to wipe out your whole first floor. So, let's see here. Hurricanes are only called hurricanes in the Atlantic and the Northeast Pacific. Okay, everywhere else, and when I say everywhere else, Northwest Pacific, they're called typhoons. That's after, so hurricane is after a Caribbean god, and then typhoon is after an Asian of some sort god. And then South Pacific and Indian Oceans, they're called cyclones. Basic storm cyclone. That doesn't have any lineage that I was able to find. So now that we've talked about how hurricanes, the 3 stages of hurricanes, and how they really build their power and all, let's talk about the categories and once it becomes a hurricane, why is it a 1 or 2 or 3, etc. So category 1s have winds between 74 and 95, the storm surge of 4 to 5 feet. So as tall as me, as tall as you guys, this storm surge, like I mentioned, is the water coming in. It's the rising floods. It's that real power at the ground. But it's expected to make minimal land damage. Okay, so think about when you're out at Tybee, that storm surge is going to come up to the top of the pier instead of the bottom. You know, so it's not a big difference. Category 2, winds are between 96 and 110. The storm surge is between 6 and 8 feet, and it's going to cause moderate land damage. Category 2, we saw Matthews just last year. Category 2 was causing some flooding in Tybee. It wiped out that that highway. You couldn't. It was inaccessible. You know. So Category 3, we're going from 111 to 129 miles per hour. Storm surge is 9 to 12, and it's going to cause extensive land damage. This is where your first floor is going to get flooded. You know. So minor damage really at 1 and 2, but serious, hey, we need to get out of here at 3. Category 4, your wind damage is your wind speed is 130 to 156. Your storm surge is 13 to 18. And there's extreme land damage. Oh. Extreme land damage, you're probably taking out your second floor now too. Category 5, that's anything over 157. So we saw Hurricane Irma. It was coming in, I think I recall 185 was first coming in at, and then slowly start to die. That storm surge is 19 feet tall. It's taken out 3-story buildings. It's catastrophic. Like, that is one of the most powerful storms we have. So lastly, let's kind of breeze through some naming conventions here. Hurricanes are named for historical records and for easy communication. Before 1954, hurricanes were named by their region and how often they spawn. So the first one, Atlantic 1, Atlantic 2, Gulf 1, Gulf 2. But they had a lot of problems. People were miscommunicating, and we're talking about different storms in different parts of the country. So the governing body, the people that have control over how they're named and when they're named, etc., is the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. They use 6 lists. Those lists rotate every year. So Irma will not be renamed for 6 years, if it does. So an important fact is not all hurricanes can be renamed the same name. You can retire a name. So Katrina, for example. Katrina can never be used again because it did so much damage, and it's just sensitive to the public at that point, you know. So as we discussed, hurricanes are the most devastating and destructive weather effects that we can experience. You know, volcanoes and earthquakes are 2 and 3 behind it. But now I hope to inform you guys enough to, when you're watching the news about Hurricane Jose that's coming in, you understand kind of where it's at. And there, of course, there's tons of charts online. You can kind of look at it, but you understand it came from the Himalayas. You understand the speeds that it's coming at, and when it says storm surge, that's the serious part of it. It's not the wind damage so much. But thank you for coming in tonight. I appreciate the short notice arrivals and all, but that is my speech for this week. I will see you next week.